It's been almost an entire decade since the Destiny incident in 2014, in which the gaming public, were exposed to the failure that was Bungie's next big IP, Destiny, which was slated to be the next big IP in the industry, right? It was supposed to be the biggest game of the decade. It was supposed to be this phenomenon. It was supposed to be this big deal. And of course, it flopped right out of the gate. Now, the industry made excuses for it. The developers said they were going to fix it. Fanboys continue to blame Microsoft, Activision, everyone but Bungie themselves, right? Everyone could see the writing on the wall, but it took us until 2023, 9 years later, to finally see Bungie fall apart with the Sony acquisition, with the layoffs, with just the failures of Destiny in general, right? What it all comes down to is just Destiny was not successful, right? And only just now are we in the point where that failure is destroying the company. Like, we are never going to see another new IP from Bungie. We're never going to see, like, them reboot the IP or do something new with it or come up with some expansion to fix the game. It's over, right? And I think it's really interesting to see how it happened, because for me, Destiny was like the cornerstone of Gamergate. Like, this was the real issue. That game journalists were refusing to admit this highly anticipated major IP, the highest budget ever in the history of the industry, something like, what, $500 million? This huge thing was a complete and total flop. I saw journalists like Damage Control. I saw them downplay people's concerns. I saw them try and act like nothing was wrong, that the game was perfectly fine, and that your expectations were just overblown. But now look at it. 9 years later, nobody is defending Destiny. Nobody remembers Destiny. Nobody is playing Destiny. I believe even like those original discs from Destiny 1 are basically worthless now, because I believe they shut the servers down quite a long time ago. Like, what exactly are you going to see from Destiny going forward, right? Like, Destiny is a complete failure, right? And it's taken Bungie with it, right? For me, this is a really good example, I think, of just what we should reasonably expect when it comes to like major shifts and changes in the industry. This is the critical mistake that Gamergate made, right? Other than like, focusing too much on like irrelevant feminists like Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn instead of like actual major players in the industry, PlayStation, Bungie, Xbox, the Western, major Western game developers, right? The thing that they didn't understand was that the industry was never going to collapse overnight, right? The things that we were noticing in 2014, the issues that were beginning to become prevalent with the DLCs, with the expansions, with like the nickel and diming everything on this DLC, like, it was going to take a very, very long time for the general audiences to catch on and start rejecting it, right? It's interesting to see just how like things that were generally accepted, 10 years ago with the DLC and such like that are being increasingly rejected, right? Mortal Kombat 1 is a really good example where I don't think anybody is eagerly anticipating the DLC releases. Like, Mortal Kombat 1, I remember when 11 came out, and I knew people in real life who were telling me that like they weren't going to pay for the DLC, right? Because it was too expensive with too little value. And seeing what's happened with Mortal Kombat 1, with how quickly the game has like fallen out of favor with the general public, how nobody's excited for the DLC, how nobody's paying for it, how nobody cares about the IP anymore. Like, it feels like more and more consumers are rejecting this process of like over monetizing everything. And Destiny, I think, is a really, really good example of that. Destiny, the creators behind the game, they legit had this like slogan that I think a lot of people aren't aware of because they weren't paying attention, but they had this like business slogan, like, we're going to turn players into payers, right? Like, Destiny was the original gas, right? Games as a service where you pay to progress and you pay to get equipment and you pay for stuff like forever, right? In order to like advance with the game. It was supposed to be the next major thing. It was supposed to be this phenomenon. It was supposed to be this endless like money printing machine, and it just didn't happen, right? The industry has moved in other directions, right? With like the Fortnite model and stuff like that. Stuff that's like not really that's free to play as opposed to like, being forced to pay like $60, $70 for a game and then being expected to like just endlessly funnel money into it, right? Like that is the Bungie situation, is that over the past decade, they've burnt through all of their goodwill. They kept saying that like, oh, we escaped Microsoft, now we can do what we want. Oh, we escaped Activision, we can do what we want. Oh, we had to get bought out by Sony to do what we want. Like they kept making excuses, and more people are just starting to reject them, right? More and more people are starting to notice that like there's something wrong here. More and more people are starting to notice that like Bungie isn't the legendary iconic studio that it was hyped up to be. I would argue Bungie was never good, but like the days of this being like the big Xbox development studio is over, right? Like they dragged this kicking and screaming for as long as they possibly could, right? The cracks have been shown have been showing since the very beginning, right? Halo always sold itself on like the realistic visuals and like the online play, and just it was never a solid IP in its own right, right? Like it was just at the right place at the right time and quickly fell off the map the instant that like the rest of the industry caught up to it, right? Halo was never a good IP. And the fact that like Bungie has failed to innovate over the past like 20 years, they failed to create anything new, like impactful, is like staggering. Like it's hilarious. Like it's amazing how Nintendo fans immediately after Rareware fell off with like the Microsoft acquisition, how immediately we rejected the game, how we immediately called developers trash, how like we condemn everything that came out after that. Grab by the Ghoulies, Perfect Dark Zero, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, right? Nuts and Bolts came out the same year as Halo 3, right? So like, what was so hard about admitting that Bungie was not a good developer? Okay, like what was so hard about admitting that Bungie wasn't all that great? Like what was so hard about that? Like why is it taken like 5, 6 terrible like releases from them for people to start like completely forgetting they exist? Like people aren't even angry at them for not putting out good content. They just kind of forgot they even existed, it almost feels like, right? That's the situation they're in. That's why they're getting laid off. That's why like they're being folded into PlayStation. It's why like they won't even exist like 20 years from now. Like they're not even really a brand name. They are irrelevant. Like the PlayStation acquisition is like, it might be the worst acquisition from Sony that I've ever seen in my life. Like, it was legit a pointless thing. I have seen so many people try to damage control it. Like, oh, they're going to be ahead of the game when it comes to developing games as a service. They're doing it to improve their networking. They're doing it for this, and this. Not for Destiny, but it was for Destiny. Like, Sony acquired Bungie to get at Destiny because they really thought that this IP had some kind of value, that like with Bungie's expertise, they would be able to put out like dozens of new gas products. And it just all imploded. It obviously imploded. And right now, I don't see anybody else really talking about this, that anyone's talking about like the big failure of Bungie, right? Like the Bungie bungle, I suppose we could call it. Like, why is nobody talking about the failure of this game and IP? Like, it just feels like so strange to me. It really just goes to show you how out of touch it feels that the rest of the industry is, and that they're not really talking about these kind of topics. They're like focusing on like irrelevant nonsense, like, Switch 2 rumors, or trying to convince themselves that like Mario Wonder is not a real game, or that they're trying to do like anything other than talk about like actual major failures in the gaming industry. And Bungie is absolutely the quintessential example of a video game company that has fallen into decline.